Matt Dragonstone, and welcome to this episode of the Dragonstone Astrology Podcast. I'm coming to you from my new digs here in the wonderful inner northern suburbs of Melbourne. I'm utterly cooked from the move, which has taken well over a month to get from start to finish. Thank you, Venus retrograde in my fourth house. But I managed in that time to record a really interesting conversation with two exceptional astrologers, Mel Priestley from Canada and Zamboni Funk from the United States. And we spoke about an article that I discovered one day, actually on my computer. I have a funny thing that happens to me sometimes where I notice a tab open and I don't know how it got there, but it just seems to be magically open on my browser. This article was on a Substack, and the article was about scarcity and astrology. And I'm really fascinated by the way in which astrology functions in a capitalist marketplace, and the article speaks a lot about that in direct and indirect ways, and I wanted to talk about it with some friends. So I recorded this conversation, and I hope you guys like it, and without any further ado, I'll switch over now. Hope you enjoy it. Bye.
I wish you would.
Nice. Cool. All right. So welcome to the Dragonstone podcast. I'm Matt Dragonstone. And today we've got an amazing episode because I'm joined by two international colleagues. So it's not just an Australian astrology podcast. We also go worldwide to as far afield as North America. We've got Zamboni Funk, who's joining us from the United States, and we've got Mel Priestley, who's joining us from the wonderful world of Canada. Hello, everybody. How you guys going?
What's up?
Hey.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah,
No problem,
thanks
buddy.
for having us on.
Nice. All right. So the reason why I've assembled this international team of superstars is I wanted to talk today about an article that I found. The article is titled "Astrology Has a Scarcity Mindset Problem." It's on the Substack Cosmic Indigestion. The author is only presenting themselves as Sadal Sud, but it's got an interesting thesis, and I read it. I can't remember where I found it. It's just one of those things that bubbles up and it just ends up on a tab. And, I was just kind of reading it and thought it would be good to have a chat to other professional astrologers about the thesis of the article. So that's what we're doing today. Before we get into it, though, I just want to introduce our guests who have very kindly given their time to appear today. So we'll start with Mel Priestley. Mel Priestley is a consulting astrologer and writer based in Edmonton, Canada. She's been studying astrology for many years and completed the Fundamentals of Natal Astrology certificate at Kepler College in 2021. She's been a professional freelance writer for 15 years and has written extensively about wine and food and theatre, and now astrology, the important stuff. She currently serves on the executive committee of the Edmonton Astrological Society and is also co-lead of OPA's Canadian Satellite. So welcome, Mel. Nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
No problemo. Next up is Zamboni Funk. Zamboni Funk is a professional weirdo. When he isn't playing bootylicious funk on the bass, he tells stories about the ongoing dramas of the heavens, with the basic understanding that whatever happens up there happens down here too. As above, so below. Timing is his specialty. From electing auspicious beginnings to keeping a killer pocket on stage, celestial and terrestrial, inquisitive minds and bumping rumps, it's all the one stuff. Right. Hello, Zamboni. Thank you for coming along.
Yeah, I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries at all, mate. All right, cool. So the backstory here is about the article, and I guess a good jumping off point is general thoughts about what's going on. What did you guys think about the article? What was the impressions from what the author was trying to kind of talk about?
Well, I remember when I read it, and it was early this year, pretty soon after I think it was published in early 2023, and I generally agreed with it. But it's a great piece of writing. It's great, but I also felt that it was a very specific take on the astrological community. It's very much about Twitter. It's very much about what astrology is on Twitter and social media. which isn't the whole of the astrological community, but certainly can feel that way sometimes, I think. So yeah, so a lot of what I thought when I was reading it was just, well, that's kind of Twitter in general. When you talk about people wanting to tear you down and all this infighting, and even admits subtweeting and things like that, and it's that exists on Twitter. Not necessarily that's not necessarily the story sort of in the broader astrological community, whatever that is.
Yeah, fair. Zamboni, what did you think about it, mate?
Yeah, I that was a lot of my takeaway there as well. Is like Twitter is a dumpster fire, right? And Twitter is a perfect place to get into arguments and to it's like Twitter is basically made for argumentation and really thrives on that sort of thing. And so I didn't even have a Twitter for a long time, and now I do have a Twitter. And I am not pleased to have a Twitter. But one of the things that I've found is that it's almost the only time I feel like I have something to contribute to the conversation is when I have a point of disagreement with someone. I don't necessarily feel a need to reply to anyone's tweet if I'm like, yeah, you did it. That's what you said. You know what I mean? I don't really feel like but if I have a point where I'm like, oh, well, I don't really think so, and here's a point you missed, or here's something you're overlooking, or something like that, then that tends to be the place where I feel like I actually have something to contribute. And so that's what Twitter is made for. And so if we find ourselves in a place where we just disagree all the time, and there's all this fighting and all this sort of one-upmanship and this kind of thing, then that is what that platform does. And sort of more broadly than even Twitter is frequently mentioned throughout the article. But if we think more broadly than Twitter, then we might notice that social media generally is very much it kind of gets into the space of comparison, comparing my craft to your craft, or comparing my career or success or whatever it is, comparing me to you, and especially feeling like whatever I have doesn't measure up to whatever Instagrammable, beautiful imagery you've posted on your feed. And so, and feeling like that sense of lack. And so, that speaks to the scarcity mindset situation, but that isn't necessarily, that's not rooted in astrology. That's this wider spread situation that goes on with anyone who is in the kind of social media gig economy.
Yeah, I dig it, man. So the first thing that I guess I should have done actually before we started talking was to summarize the article. But it's interesting that the Twitter kind of preoccupation by the author does kind of make me think that maybe they just had a bad experience on Twitter per se, and didn't necessarily kind of, explore what options there were in other social media platforms. But the main gist.
Well, so this is actually a question that I have here, because and for you maybe, because I would like to know. Yeah. So one of the reasons why I joined Twitter after not having a Twitter for so long is because I've done fairly well on my Instagram and YouTube and whatever, right, and TikTok, and mostly those platforms is me as an astrologer talking to astrology enthusiasts, people who think about astrology sometimes, but don't necessarily know what's going on. And then I joined Twitter in order to get into conversations with other professional astrologers, or other people who are at the level of study that I'm at. And so, and I didn't find those things very much on Instagram or whatever. And so if not Twitter, then where else does one go to find that kind of community, do you think?
Do I think? Well, I mean,
conferences.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Astrology
conferences, live events. Yeah.
Yeah, face-to-face is important. Look, I mean, I joined Twitter in 2019 because I thought it would be another social media platform arrow in my quiver, so to speak. So the story with me is that I've been doing astrology for 20 years. charging people for readings and stuff. But I had a day job until about 2019. And then I decided to go full time. And the first thing I did was like Google what is astrology full time? Can I please be? Something along those lines, right? And the advice that I was getting was get onto social media and use that as the sort of distribution point for your brand, get your brand out there via those channels, etc. So Twitter was part of the cavalcade of social media platforms that I was attempting to install myself on. Some of them have gone well. Instagram's good for me, right? Facebook is not. YouTube is, right? There's a couple of different sort of feedback loops that I get from clients who find me through social media. And Twitter just never really gelled. It's good to observe. I like to, keep up to date on the feed. But I can completely understand why, for instance, somebody who apparently, according to the article, has only had that, exposure to Twitter or Astro Twitter or whatever it's called, coming away from it feeling a little bit sort of salty about what they've found, so to speak. So the ins and outs of the article, like the nuts and bolts of it, there are parts that I agree with, parts that I don't agree with, but the general thesis, that the author's trying to kind of communicate here is that astrology has a scarcity mindset problem when the opposite is the case. They started out, fresh, doe-eyed and wanting to kind of engage with, the astrology community, and decided to try and do that on Twitter and came away from it not necessarily finding what they were looking for. And there's a couple of points that come up in the article that I think are really pertinent to the discussion I want to have with you guys, which is, there's an assumption that if you're going to engage in an astrology community, you're going to find a room full of wizards, basically, or a room full of gurus, or you're going to find a community where everybody is, very sort of enlightened and everything's groovy. But, the way that astrology works these days, that's really difficult to find because most people who present themselves as astrologers, they're doing so professionally, and we're all kind of hooked into the capitalist nightmare. Hence, we're operating with the assumption that scarcity is built into our profession. The author does go on at the end of the article to say, not necessarily the case, 8 billion people on Earth, we're in the age of air, the epochal shift has happened, it's up to us to push everything forward. But that first part where he's outlining, or they're outlining the problem, that's something that I think is really quite interesting because they've kind of nosedived straight into Twitter and gone, Jesus Christ, what is this? And then come out of it with a bunch of critiques of the community that I think are really important. And places like Discord as well, just going back to your question, Zamboni, like Discord's quite good. Some of the less broad-based social media platforms where you're not necessarily connecting with strangers, you're finding particular communities where there's a forum type atmosphere. That's quite good. But maybe that's just me being old. I don't know. What do you reckon, Mel? What's your take on it?
Yeah, so I'm coming at it from a bit of a different perspective. So I've been on Twitter since 2009, I think, like early.
Jesus.
But it was, yeah, right. But it was as a writer. So I was really involved in my local I was a freelance writer in wine and food, as you mentioned in my bio at the beginning. I wasn't talking about astrology at the beginning. And so I had kind of found a little Twitter community and following of mainly like local chefs and food people and people who like food and wine and stuff. So when I shifted to astrology, in we'll say, yeah, like 2019 to 20, I basically just left Twitter. Like I mothballed it. At the beginning of the pandemic, especially, that was it for me. I was like, I'm done. I am not looking at this. This isn't healthy. Bye. So I just don't engage on Twitter. I kept my account open so I can look at it, especially now because Elon's changed it so you can't even spy on it unless you have an account, right? So I'm glad I have an account, I guess. But I don't engage anymore. And I really pulled back from everything. I deleted my Facebook a few years ago and then I restarted it recently, grudgingly, because I thought I needed it. I don't think I do. Anyway, I don't do much on there. So I'm kind of in this weird state where my astrology practice occurs because of my blog, because I write and I've always written, and now I'm just writing about astrology, and literally random people on the internet Google things and find my blog, and some of them book readings for me, and that's how I get my clients. And I'm cool with that, but I don't do astrology full time. So I have the honestly the luxury of a day job, even though having a day job and trying to do this side hustle, takes a lot of energy, and I don't do nearly as much astrology as I want to. But the good news about that is I don't have to depend on my astrology work to pay my bills. So if I don't have a lot of clients for a little while, it's okay. But yeah, so I'm at the mercy and fates of whoever Googles me and likes what I've written and decides to take a chance on booking a reading with me. So it's a bit, I don't think I'm very representative of like the astrology community, but I do wonder how many people are doing it sort of part-time like me.
Yeah, that's the thing, mate. I don't think that you're not representative of the astrology community. And, when I first sort of got in touch about appearing on the show, I thought, oh, Mel's a full-time astrologer. I'd always known you as an astrologer, right? I hadn't known you as a writer. But, there's probably heaps. I know a couple of people who don't have to work. They're old, they're retirement age, older people. And this is their passion. That's what they're doing in retirement, is practicing full time or practicing sort of ad hoc, something that they've wanted to do for the rest of, most of their lives, so to speak. And I imagine it gives you freedom as well to have that kind of, yeah.
Yeah, like I don't worry about my brand or my image. If anything, I completely destroyed my brand and my image because what I had built up was Mel Priestley, Edmonton food and wine writer. And then when I switched, so I went dark kind of over the pandemic. And then when I just started, I do post some of my astrology work through the social media channels. I'm sure all of the people who used to follow me because they wanted my like hot local food takes are like, she's writing about what now? Mercury retrograde, what? Like, so I'm sure I've lost a lot of followers. I don't even care. I barely follow it, right? But yeah, so I don't know, it was a big shift for me. And maybe there's some people who have followed me because they actually like both wine and astrology, but I'm not sure.
No, that's fair. I'm all for destroying brands, right? I completely annihilated mine. I was an academic, basically on track to be an academic philosopher, and they're quite deeply in there with the materialist mindset. And then all of a sudden, the part of me that I'd sort of kept clandestine for quite a while came out thanks to Uranus.
Yeah.
We'll get into the astrology later, though, because
for me, it was the Saturn Pluto in 2020. It was on my midheaven. And so then I was like, I can be a public astrologer. I did worry about that though, because of all these reasons, right? And my day job is it's very, very, I'm in the finance industry. So I do know some people have Googled me and you see my blog, like I come right up. So I'm sure but again, I think they just go, oh, okay, she's kind of a weirdo, whatever. But
yeah, it's more about, does it even matter? You know what I mean? Like these days, right?
So far.
Who knows? Yeah. I mean, Zamboni, like you're earning money from astrology. You've got a very stable, sensible backup career in music, which is great, which I'm sure does wonders for your income security.
Indeed. Yeah. Stable and secure is the way that musicians live. Don't you already know?
Oh yeah, it's accountants, lawyers, musicians for stable careers, mate.
There it is. You already know. So yeah, well, I mean, like even in my bio, you know what I mean? Like the bio that I sent you that you read at the top there, like I'm a professional weirdo, and so I have always embraced that. Like I would have been committed to doing like sort of starving artist shit for a long time. And so I've like, I've worked in restaurants or like whatever, like kind of side jobs or whatever. But yeah, I have been doing astrology. So I was working in an herb shop. I also studied herbalism at the time that I was living in New York City. And I know New York City is like a funny place to study herbalism, but I feel like that there's an angle there that is really resonant for our times. But that's a whole different point. So I was studying herbalism, and so I was working in an herb shop for a while. So I had an herb shop job, and I was doing gigs on the bass, playing music, and I had astrology. And then the pandemic happened, and I lost the store job and I lost the gig, the music gigs. And so it turned into all astrology at that point. And, but for me, it was really interesting because at the same time that happened, then, George Floyd was tragically murdered by police. And so then in that moment, there was like a social media moment that had been going on. And I, at that point, had already been doing like daily and weekly astrology readings for maybe 3.5 years by that point. So I was like regularly on that grind doing that already. And then in that moment, people started being like, oh, well, like, how come the only astrologers that are on my feed are white women? Like, maybe I should branch out and find some black people. And so I made a couple of lists. Like, my favorite black astrologer is like I made a couple of those lists. And so my social media following like quadrupled in the space of like 4 days or something like that. It was wild. And so, but I had been already on the grind for doing forecasts and everything. So all I had to do was continue what I was doing at that point. And so it turned out that losing those 2 other jobs that I had turned out okay because I was already ready for my astrology close up, as it were.
Yeah, for sure, man. So, I'm full-time, right, myself, right? So one of the things that I joke about destroying brands, but I think the brand is destroying brands for me, right? But still there's an element where I have to kind of participate in a community from the basis of professionalism rather than necessarily doing it for the love or, doing it with the luxury of having some time to sit back and wait for the clients to come to me. So I'm in there hustling with everybody else. Most of my clients actually come from face to face. I live in a city called Melbourne, Australia. It's not an amazingly big place. It's about maybe 5-6 million people. But I do a lot of my face-to-face work at markets and I'm getting people in from there. And so there's not so much of an emphasis on the social media presence for me, although I still like to maintain it because it's great to hook, a US client, a UK client, someone from elsewhere in Australia. But in the act of doing that, right, and I think this applies to all of us, in the act of doing that, you get introduced to the way in which capitalism and astrology have kind of intertwined, which is there's a limited pool of clients who want to see you just for astrology, as in, my experience is first timers will come in curious about astrology. Repeat clients come in because they want to talk to me, and astrology is the tool or the language that we use to have those conversations. And so you're kind of, you find yourself competing. Sometimes aggressively, sometimes not aggressively. It's all up to your personal style. And I think that the author of the article, right, observed this happening and observed the ways in which astrologers are utilizing capitalism to get money because we all need to eat, we all need to put a roof over our heads, etc. And that's what they're recoiling from, the way in which that particular aspect of doing astrology these days is affecting people's behavior and sometimes turning them into assholes. Who knows, right? So I'm just wondering, like, what's it like for both of you in terms of the hustle, right? I'll start with Mel because, as somebody who's not doing this full time, there's a little bit of like leeway there and wriggle room, but you still want to get clients, right? You still want to see people.
Yeah. So for starters, Melbourne being 5 to 6 million, that's a big city. My city is, that's big. Okay. That's big. Yeah, you said that, and I was like, oh, that's huge. I live in a
LA,
town,
like 25 million people, or New York.
Sure. Listen, I'm a little old Canadian
New York has
here,
8 million people.
Oh, okay, 8 million.
Wow. Okay, that's still huge. My town, the metro area, is like 1 million. And that's like a big city. Anyway, yeah, but I'm in Canada, so we're smaller. Anyway, so markets is interesting because I looked at doing markets here. We have like a couple like witch market type thingies. And I was signed up for one actually, and I pulled out last minute because I just didn't want to. I also just felt like that wasn't really a great environment for doing, like, I was going to do like mini readings or something, and yeah, just to try to get, hopefully hook some people interested so they'd book a full reading with me after. But I decided I didn't want or need to do that. If I was full time, I'm sure I would have done that. But yeah, so again, this is why I've kept a day job. I'm a Taurus rising and Cancer sun, and so I like stability and my home environment to be secure and stable. So I'm going to keep the day job for the time being. I have no plans to go 100% full time with anything, and that's why I never did that with writing either. So people were always like, "Oh, Mel, why don't you go full time freelance?" And I was like, "Are you kidding me? No, I'll hate writing then." And I was worried that the same thing would happen with astrology. Is I'll hate it, or it'll feel like a grind. It'll feel like work instead of still kind of, and it can still feel like like a bit of a grind when you're like, oh, I should write a blog article. But if I don't want to write a blog article, I don't have to. Like, I just don't have to. So yeah. But to answer your kind of question, I guess about that, yeah, I don't know. I guess that's just why I haven't gone full time and have no plans to, because it's something shifts in your practice fundamentally. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm not, I don't want to do that with astrology. I want it to still be something that I like, and sometimes distance from it, and not having to do it every single day for 8 hours a day because of whatever, like, that helps.
Yeah. What have you observed shifting in practices where people, for instance, that you've come across? What's that observation that you've made?
Oh, so sorry. In my practice, or just
Well, just the reticence for going full time. Something will shift in your
yeah,
practice. You don't necessarily want to do that. What do you think that is?
yeah. Mm, for that's certainly the instability of an unsteady paycheck that just
Mhm.
it terrifies me, honestly. And I'm the breadwinner for the family, so I just feel like I can't take that chance. And then I also wonder what will happen if I commodify, because I do really think of astrology in spiritual terms. It's a fundamental cornerstone of my spirituality and who I am,
Yeah.
and so I don't want to necessarily go to the planets every day and say, all right, guys, you got to deliver me the goods. And there's a bit of that, like it's a give and take. Fun fact, though, I've observed when things get really dry, like if I haven't had a new client in a while, a few weeks or even a couple months, I'll give someone a free reading and I get a new client, a paid client, like immediately. The last time I did this was a few weeks ago, and a random person booked paid reading while I was giving the free reading to someone. So anyway, I'm batting like an average of, like, I've only done it like 5 or 6 times, but I mean that's pretty good for like getting a new client every single time. So I feel like that charity aspect, I don't know, the planetary spirits seem to like that. So I also think that when you get into a scarcity mindset in general, and this is not just for astrology but for everything, it's you get more scarce. And I don't have this fully fleshed out, but I guess when I was constantly worrying about money and just thinking, oh, I don't have enough, I don't have enough, I don't have enough, there wasn't enough. There was never enough. And shifting your mind, and now I sound like a bunch of new speak, like just think rich and you'll be rich, but no, it takes hard work too. But yeah, but there's something there, really, there is.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Look, I really dig the whole, when things are dry, you give away a reading, you get a reading back. And, the need for security is kind of ingrained in us. But I have a similar kind of approach, and I have a theory, right? And I'm really keen to hear what you guys think about the theory, which is that as astrologers, and particularly as astrologers who I think it's safe to say for all three of us, we're leaning heavily into the intersections of astrology and magic and spirituality, particularly. My experience has been that we don't work in the same economy as everybody else. But if we try and work in the same economy as everybody else, it kind of turns to shit a little bit. So if I'm dry for a bit, then yeah, I'll do the same thing. I'll give a discount, or I'll give a free reading, or I'll find people who I haven't sort of spoken to for a while and just been like, let's have a chat. And then somehow in an unrelated way, a client will drop in. There's also, petitions. There's also keeping the daily planetary practice up to date. And as a result of that, I started full-time in 2019, then the pandemic happened and completely cooked me. I was doing exclusively online for a while, and, I've had 2 kids in that time. And it's not like my partner is a neurosurgeon or, a CEO. She's in an even less stable career than me. She's a dance teacher. So there's a lot of uncertainty around our household. And I'm a Taurus rising as well, Mel. I've got a huge Taurus stellium in the first house. So you would think that stability would be key. But thinking about stability and thinking about the way in which it's all kind of worked out makes me sort of feel like astrologers operate in a different economy. And if we pretend that we're just kind of going into the marketplace, figuratively or otherwise, to sell our wares like any other merchant, that's sort of where our behavior changes, is stepping too far into not necessarily capitalism, but just the way that the economy works. I'm assuming for Canada and United States as well as Australia, we're all Western democracies, so to speak. What do you guys think of that? Do you reckon we work in the same economy, or do you think we work in some sort of strange, otherworldly, intersection of the two?
Well, I would hesitate to think that spirits are not involved in the normie economy, you know? So
they're super involved. The amount of sinks I see in my boring finance day job, it makes me laugh. Anyway.
Really?
No. Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. Spirits are everywhere. I mean, I'm an animist, so of course I think that, but yeah. Anyway, sorry, go. Yeah.
No. So that's exactly my point. Yeah. So so I don't know that we participate in a different economy. Also, so one thing that so one way that I have been sort of able to make a more steady paycheck out of this is, so I've got like my freelance clients, the people who come through my website and who find me like on social media and stuff like this, right? But then I also work on an app called Sanctuary, where they take over half the money, and I do these like mini readings that like the same kind of mini readings that you, Mel, were like, fuck that shit, right? And so I'm sorry, am I allowed to cuss on here? I forget.
Go for it. Yeah. You're good to go.
All right,
yeah,
cool.
just go. Complete freedom of speech and belief, dude. Go for it.
All that. Yeah, your brand is iconoclastic, right? So let's fucking do it. So but yeah, so I work on this app, and I do these little mini readings. So I will do like 5, 10, or 15-minute readings. And so people come into the chat, and it's a text-based situation. So I just type back and forth with people for a little while. And so those are people. So again, the same way as like my TikTok is mostly aimed at people who don't necessarily speak astrological language. Those are folks who are coming in like very entry level most times, you know, like a lot of them know their sun sign and don't know anything else. And so, but they come in and they in 5 minutes want to know like when they're going to meet their husband or something like this, right? And so it's there's like a navigation of that I have to do. But and so that puts me very much into the kind of like normie algorithmic marketplace, you know, like I work on an app at a tech startup, you know what I mean? Like, so it's very normal in that kind of way. And I often think about integrity in that space, because I feel very much like I am bound by my craft and by the spirits of the ancestors and this kind of thing to practice my craft in a way that feels like it is full of integrity, even if I am in that algorithmic marketplace. And so this frequently comes into a place where like I'm giving answers to people that they don't like and this kind of thing. You know, it's like it's clear that they want me to say that they're going to meet their husband in 2 days, and like that's not how this works. You know what I mean?
You have Saturn on your descendant. You're not going to meet your husband in 2 days.
Oh, no.
I was just about to say that. Right? Yeah, totally. Yeah, right? Or ruling the descendant, all of that, right? Yeah. So like it's just a whole. It's frequently, and honestly, it's like herbalism in that like if you've come to an astrologer about this, it's because shit's not working for you and you have exhausted all of your other options, right? And so yeah, that's like so I feel very much like I am participating in a normal style economy, and all of the prayers that I do and all the rest of it, like this is standard issue as far as I'm concerned, you know?
Yeah.
I don't think there's a separate economy. I think it's all one, like for everything. So yeah, there's different, I guess, nuances to astrology, but we're part of, we all have the same bills, you know, we're all, you know, yeah. So I don't think it is a separate economy at all. The mini readings are interesting. So I thought about offering those at like a marketplace. I thought about offering them through my blog, like, you know, give people a teaser. Good and bad. Through an app, I think you're probably getting the best and the worst experience of that. I guess it's over in 5 minutes, right? So, you know, even if it was a disaster, it's over quick. But yeah, you might as well be working at well, I don't know what the analogy would be, but like Uber, like delivering food or something. Like it's very much a gig
Definitely.
based,
It's gig
It's
it's the
based.
modeled
same
on
thing.
Uber.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So I love that you have the integrity with it because as you were talking, I was thinking, man, it'd be so easy to just be like, you're totally gonna meet your twin flame in 5 days. And I'm sure there's people on there who do that. You don't obviously because you take this seriously and it's the magic and the spiritual component of it. You know that I'm sure like if you started doing that shit, like it would backfire badly. Like the spirits are not gonna like that. Personally, that's my take
Definitely
anyway. I
not.
feel like but I'm sure there's some people who do that. Like you could, right? Yeah, it's all good, man. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never
For
fucked around and found out about that.
mm-mm,
The only
I
Yeah, me
wouldn't.
integrity I
neither.
care about is maintaining like the professional integrity, the integrity relative to the
Yeah.
craft, and
Mhm.
the spirits that I'm working with. So I've never really pushed it to see if it's going to work or not. But like I did the same thing for a while, Zamboni. I was working for a company called Life Reader, and that was mainly tarot, not astrology. And I do tarot as well as astrology, and that's the bulk of the business that I'm getting at markets because most people are familiar with the cards as opposed to a chart on
Mhm.
an iPad that you can show them. But at the same time, like I dig the whole, it's not separate economies because I'd never thought about the gig economy and the way that just is the way the world is these days. Like how everybody is freelancing, everybody is doing X, Y, or Z. It's
Yeah,
been,
Uber is a really great example of that.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
and I feel like Uber is kind of like the model for everything at this
Mm,
point. Like if it's going to go through the tech startup model or like way of reaching people, right? If it's going to go through an app, then it's going to more or less follow the idea of like there's this like overarching umbrella company that then sort of like employs like freelance contractors or whatever and like finds ways to like skirt around paying taxes and this kind of thing. Like that's like the model. That's what we do in the gig economy in the freelance space.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, the last full-time gig that I had, Taurus Rising is again, Mel, I was in the finance industry and insurance. And that was incredibly staid, and there was leave and there were entitlements. Insurance isn't an issue in Australia like Canada, but we had a lot of really good perks, right? And every fortnight that money would come in, whether I gave a shit or not. And, that was sort of the way it was. But I never sort of compared the astrology community with the rest of the world as it appears these days in 2023, where everybody is just basically operating within a scarcity mindset, sort of, because gig economies set you up to go, I got to stay logged in. I've got to stay like hustling. I've got to stay open for clients, right? I got 24-hour availability on Fridays, which is when I see clients via Zoom because I got to grab them. I got to grab whoever's coming in. And if someone in the UK wants to see me at 3 a.m. my time, who am I to say no? It's money, right? And so getting that into your head and sort of operating within that makes me kind of question whether or not astrologers operate in another economy. But I guess you guys are right. We actually just operate in the economy. And that's just how it looks these days.
I wonder though if that is a mindset of scarcity, because one thing that I find through working in the like app space and the internet and the wider internet where all of the strangers are available, like that's a lot of people,
Exactly.
Yeah.
like that's, I feel like I'm like not super concerned about like their readings are going to come in. They're going to stay in these bullshit situationships with dudes that won't text them back. You know what I mean? And they're going to want some, they're going to want some advice about that, or they're going to want to see what's going on. They're going to want some context around that. You know what I mean? Like there's a certain amount of like abundance in that that's built in,
Zamboni, how many clients on average, I'm sure it varies, but do you think you get a week, coming through the apps and stuff?
A week. Let's see. So in a month, it's usually around 150. So
Wow.
divide that by 4, and that's what, like 35 or something like this.
That's tons. Wow. Okay. So to put
It's a
this in
lot.
context,
Yeah.
that's a ton. Yeah. Like I get like 1 to 3 clients a month.
Okay.
Right.
But again, part-time, this isn't my main income by any means. And I don't do hardly any social media engagement. So I'm not exactly putting myself out there like, come get a reading from me, right? So I feel like 1 to 3 a month, and that's a full paid reading, right? Like, so an hour, hour and a half long, and
Yeah.
you know, a couple $100. So I think that's pretty good for someone who's not going out there all the time. But I have to say, I am,
Most definitely.
as I've progressed, I've kind of just I'm doing more like not conferences but lectures. Eventually I'll probably like to speak at some conferences. So my practice is kind of going in that direction as opposed to really focusing on client work. I think I'll always have a client practice, but it's never going to be full time, I think. But yeah, wow, 150 a month is that doesn't sound scarce to me.
Right.
That's the
So
thing.
like that's
That's
crazy.
the thing. You know,
And that's part of why I do it also, is because I heard one time at the beginning of my astrology career, I heard about Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours. And I heard about that, like that if you put 10,000 hours into your craft, then you will become a master at that craft. And so I wanted to become a master at the craft of reading the stars. And so I wanted to read 10,000 charts. And so the only way to do that is to just get up there and swing that fucking bat a bunch of times. And so in this like 6 years or whatever that I've been doing it, I've gotten up to like just shy of around 9,000 readings. And so the like quantity is important to me. You know, like I want to do a whole bunch of readings, even if they kind of suck sometimes. Like I'm okay with that because I'm learning how to do the thing.
Yeah, I think grinding them out's really important, but at the same time, having the luxury to allow those clients that are coming in to be quality as well, because you're sort of fresh. And if I was doing 3 readings a month, for instance, like you, Mel, the way that I'd be kind of going into it would be probably much more prepared. Right, I do about half an hour of prep before I see a client these days.
Yep. Same. Yeah.
But I would have had like enough time in between clients to muse about certain things. And if those clients had given me their details beforehand, let's just say they booked 2 or 3 weeks before the appointment, and I know that I'm dealing with a Sag with an Aquarius rising, etc., I'd be sort of musing and letting that go in the back processes a bit about what kind of way I would approach that particular interaction. For me, it's client work. I love client work. I love talking to people. Like I'm endlessly fascinated. Like Zamboni, you fascinated me today because I'm like, all right, this guy's like Scorpio, Cancer rising, moon in the first decan of Aquarius. Stop me if I'm wrong, right? And I'm like, how is this guy going to present? How's this guy going to present? How am I going to interact with him? How's this going to be a good match and a good pairing and a good alchemical wedding, so to speak, potentially? I'm not proposing, mate. Mel, Taurus rising, Cancer sun, Taurus rising like me, but midheaven Capricorn, if 2020 was
Capricorn.
on your midheaven. Yeah, right. Yeah. That's interesting. Northern latitude nativities, right? So there's that kind of, this is the thing that I'm focusing on. Anyway, that's a tangent, right? But I love that interaction of client work. But one of the things that I dig about both approaches is, you got to grind it out in order to get the skill and experience. But if you're constantly thinking, for instance, that you got to grind out as much as you possibly can for whatever reason, paying the bills or upskilling or what have you, then that's not necessarily going to jive with the traditional idea of what an astrologer is. Because the author of the article's like, I expected, everybody to be enlightened and everything's groovy, but instead I came into Twitter, which is, okay, that's colored the observation a little bit and biased the data. But it seems to me that they've kind of emerged into a space and observed a community which is having to kind of deal with working in a gig economy, not necessarily a separate economy, but just the way that the economy works. And that's coloring how an astrologer does their work these days. What do you guys reckon about that? There was no question in it. It was more an observation.
So one thing I was thinking is, so like, what is an astrologer? And we could talk about that and really navel gaze, I guess. But I was thinking, do we think we're priests and priestesses of the stars? I mean, sure, I want to think of myself that way, but it's also a job, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of astrologers who don't think of that at all. Like I do wonder, and especially of the local astrologers I've met, like some of them certainly they have some spiritual practices, but much less than I was maybe hoping for, especially, with the group here. I think we're all magic and spirituality nerds, and we have a pretty robust personal practice. But I don't get that from a lot of the people I've met firsthand, and it's a small group, really. But yeah, it was a lot less like I totally resonate with what the author of this article said at the beginning. Like they were like, the stars are amazing, our fates are mapped out, like let's have these amazing philosophical conversations, like walking under the trees like in ancient Rome, and then you're on Twitter, so that's not the situation at all. But even when I've met astrologers in person, that's not the conversations either. We're not like having these deep conversations about, I don't know, I'm trying to think of it, some obscure technique. I get that a little bit on Discord, like in a private curated community, right? So that really feeds my need to talk to other astrologers kind of on the same level. But I think that's in general the way the world's going with communities, is that to find a community of peers that you can exchange ideas with at your level, it is going to need to be a fragmented little hidden corner of the internet that's a bit gatekept, because you can't have it in the public sphere, because you'll get a million bots and other a-holes and trolls coming in who are just gonna kind of wreck the party. So even if you were engaging with someone on Twitter and having a good conversation, all it takes is one troll to come in and just like shoot you all down or whatever, right? And for me, I would just get so triggered and bothered, like if someone like attacked me, and that's why I left, right? Like, and especially over the pandemic, I was like, well, I'm not doing this. So so I don't know what my point was either. There was no point. I'm just rambling.
No, not at all. No, I think that's when you think about it, right? You have this idea, like a lot of people, I did as well, before I started engaging in the astrology community just locally in Australia in the early 2000s. I had this wonderful notion, much like I did about academic philosophy, that we'd all just be in the agora in our togas talking about, the nature of love and all the rest. But when you think about it, like I'm, over 40 now, so I've got some measure of retrospective on the way in which my mindset around astrology formed. I didn't take into account that a lot of people in Rome and Greece had slaves that paid for them to sit around doing fuck all and talk about like astrology.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I didn't realize that a lot of the court astrologers were patronized by the king or queen, and 100% were going to tell them everything they wanted to hear to sort of extend the time between the reading and when their heads got chopped off. Even into the Middle Ages and a lot of the Marsilio Ficino stuff, Florence under the Medicis, that relied on patronage, that relied on having, in most cases, a day job. If we get into, Victorian times, the Industrial Revolution, the early 20th century and onwards, a lot of the astrologers that were contributing eventually to the body of knowledge that we've inherited had day jobs, or they were independently wealthy, or they were doing something other than astrology to kind of keep, the wolves from the door, so to speak. I guess there's a lot of that as well, right? Maybe this just is what astrologers are these days, right? A combination of people who have the luxury of not relying on readings to pay the bills, people who have chosen to do this full time, like myself and Zamboni, and so we need money coming in through some way, and people who don't read for other people and charge money either by choice or because they're not quite ready to do so yet, or what have you. There's a democratization of knowledge. We've inherited a lot through the internet. We're mainly talking about the internet today, so we have access to all of this stuff. There's no gates to be kept, so to speak. And I guess, the thing that we're not is magical wizard lords who live in another dimension where clouds and wind chimes and chakras are the order of the day, right? We're just people trying to kind of do our jobs, so to speak, and there's a practical element to that.
Yeah, I don't really feel like I would want that.
You wouldn't?
I don't know that I would.
Court astrologer sounds like a nightmare job.
Yeah,
definitely.
I would hate that. Oh my God. Yeah. You're one bad reading away from, head chopped off. Like you said, Matt, like you're done, right?
very high stakes, very high stakes. I've heard people talk about like wanting to do astrology at a high corporate level, and that's all I think about is like, yo, this is a lot of stakes right now. I don't think that I have all this in me. But like, but even the sense of like, we are all enlightened, hanging out in the clouds and wizards and all this sort of stuff. Like, I don't necessarily think that is a place where I would want to spend a lot of my time. I think that there's like a kind of, so I think one thing that thinking about astrology in the marketplace, I think a question that comes up is, what is astrology good for? Right? And so when you say something like astrology works, it's like, okay, cool. Works at what? Does what thing? So I think, and what about that is marketable or saleable, right? And so to my mind, astrology is really good for knowing what time it is. And so how useful is it to know what time it is? Well, as we move into the age of air, then having good intel, having good information in the information age is pretty valuable, right? It's valuable in a way that might not have seemed quite so valuable in 1902 or something like that, right? Like when we were deep in the age of Earth, then maybe having that kind of information might not have seemed quite so valuable at that time. But now in the information age, we are here on the internet, able to have conversation, able to exchange information and ideas across continents, across whole oceans. Like there's something valuable about having and being able to understand information in a way that might not have been quite so valuable in the time of the Rockefellers or something like this, right? And so as we think about what at like the gig economy and the economy in general, like I feel like it's important for us to remember what about our craft is valuable at all to ourselves and to other people. So like the fact that I can make prayers to the planetary spheres and stuff like that, like I do that, and I make talismans and all this sort of stuff. But like that doesn't mean that is going to be my saleable craft. Like I have a gang of talismans. I don't sell any of them. That's not what I make them for. I make them to have them. I make them to keep up my relationships with those planetary spheres. I don't make them because I want to be a super badass Caitlin Kopic type. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to do what she, or like even fucking Dragonstone, right? Like I don't. You got some like high quality. I'm ready for mine. My budget is not together right now, but they look gorgeous, and so like I don't necessarily, but even though I participate in that craft, that's not going to be the thing that I end up selling. Right. Mm-hmm. And so if we're going to be astrologers who are thinking about what good astrology is in the marketplace, then it's good for us to think about what exactly are we selling and why would other people want to buy that thing?
Yeah, well, I think we're selling data interpretation. Like the data is freely available. You can go to 10,000 websites and get the data, right? Your list of figures, your squiggles on a page. But what we're doing is we're selling the interpretation of the data. And if that comes out as a marketable product that looks like, for instance, this is what time it is, right? This is a good time for this. This is a bad time for that. You know, that's one way in which you can position yourself in a marketplace. For me, the way that I kind of cook the data and interpret the data and play with it is, you know, to approach astrology as being good for constructing narratives that are useful. And that's not just because my academic background is in post-structuralism. So I think that narrative is kind of everything. It's more that the way that I work with clients, right, one-to-one, is we're talking about narratives. We're talking about a person's story and how that story is going to kind of augment itself, change, thicken. There'll be plot twists, new antagonists, things like that. It takes a little bit of a story-based vibe for me personally. But again, what we're both talking about is, this is what time it is, and this is what a story looks like. Astrology as a tool is kind of what it ends up being for me with regular clients that have been seeing me for years. They come back, and the astrology is simply the language that we're using to tell a story or talk about a story. And often with prognostics, which for me personally, in my practice in the past decade, has gotten much sharper thanks to the revival of medieval and Hellenistic stuff. That's what time it is, but that's part of the story, so to speak. Like, what do you think astrology is good for, Mel? Like, what is it for you that's good about astrology as a tool, so to speak?
Well, yeah, everything you guys just said, making sense, right? Like finding some way of making sense of why things happen. And that's essentially why a client comes to you. Like why? Like why is this happening? Why am I like this? Why did this all of that, right? So it answers that why question, I think, in very profound ways. And hindsight with astrology with you too is better than 2020. It's like 2040 vision, right? Of course, we can all look back and say, yeah, okay, look at the map of the planets and how that all went. And of course, the key is to try to get that in the future, which is hit or miss, honestly. Um, but yeah, like, oh, I've just lost it. What was I gonna say? Darn it. Hmm.
That's okay. I was trying to get this before the station, so maybe Mercury's slowing down a little bit. I'm
No,
a bit fuzzy myself, man.
no, he has, and I've definitely noticed that actually. I had two people ask me today, like, yo, what's up with Mercury? And I was like, oh, he's in Virgo and he's about to station. Anyway, yeah. So someone else better go because I just lost my train of thought.
That's cool, man. Look, I guess the thing was, what is astrology good for? As in, how can you position it in a marketplace? And I think we've had, as a community, as a profession, probably a good decade of ramping up, right? Where everything's ramped up. Astrology's become, I hate to say it, hot right now. You know what I mean? So there's been a lot of interest and a rise in popularity, and a lot of that is going to stay. We've had the new intake of people into astrology that they had in the 60s with the Pluto and Leo generation. I think we've had the same thing happen recently. But that moment is going to pass. And, once the market kind of moves on, and once people sort of they're not necessarily in love with astrology per se, but they've had enough of a rudimentary, even by osmosis, education in what, an ascendant is, a moon sign, a bit, whatever, all the rest of the planets. They're still going to be searching for wisdom. They're still going to be searching for meaning, and they're still going to be asking the perennial question, which is why. And I guess when it comes to people coming to you for help, I feel like we're going to get into a situation where there'll be, I got to call Mel Priestley. Like Mel Priestley's the one. I need that Mel Priestley vibe for this particular problem. Or I need to know what fucking time it is. Get me Zamboni funk now. You know what I mean? Like that's going to be the sort of, it's the personal brand, I think, basically. And when we think about the astrologers that we're aware of as big names, even from the past, all the way back to like Firmicus, they were doing other shit as well. Like we just know their astrology output. We just know them in their astrological sort of guises, so to speak, when they've got that kind of mask on. But they were doing other stuff as well. And I think that maybe what we're witnessing in terms of the issue that the author has with the article around scarcity and how that turns people into the opposite of what he was expecting or they were expecting, that's what we're kind of dealing with at the moment, is the way in which the market has kind of turned its gaze on us like the eye of Sauron. And pretty soon that's going to go elsewhere. We're going to sort of end up with, I guess, the people that are into it, and that's it, not many more newbies coming in.
I remember what I was going to say.
Great.
AI is not going to destroy us. This is
No.
why. So honestly, and this is true for everyone, anyone who's freaking out about AI, particularly with their job, I think find a new job then, honestly, if you truly think that a robot will replace you. But I honestly just don't think that they can or will. And the whole AI, oh, we're going to lose, especially as astrologers. I'm like, there have been canned reports that you can run for like what, 20 years? As
Yeah.
long as the internet's existed, you could run a report and it spits out your moon is here and it means this, your Venus is here and it means this. And so, I mean, that's not AI per se, but it's, it's a robot giving you something. And that's always been there. So I personally I don't care about AI. Like, it's fascinating. And we're certainly going to see more of it, but I'm not threatened by it as an astrologer. Like, if you are satisfied with an AI interpretation of your chart, fine, great, good for you. You don't need me. But I think a lot of people will need someone on the other end to provide that for them. So yeah. And again,
a very common question I get. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. No, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Oh, well, a very common question I get from clients is, okay, so what does that mean for me? So like you can say like, okay, so you've got the moon in this position and you can even delineate it a little bit. And they'll be like, okay, but like, what does this mean for me right now? You know what I mean? And so I totally agree that like a person to speak to a person's situation is endlessly necessary.
Yeah, maybe even more so with all the AI everywhere. Like, we're gonna all be talking to robots, and it's just gonna be like AI is just gonna be through everything. So having like a person to person connection is gonna be like a thing you really want more so than anything else. Like, there's almost like a niche. So the other day I actually thought, I'm not gonna do this yet, but when on my blog, I wrote an article and I was just looking at my homepage and I was like, should I put a note on here being like, no AI was used to create any of the content on this blog? And then I was like, no, you know what? If it's not obvious that a human wrote this, I'm doing something wrong. And then, fun fact, an hour later, thanks, Instagram is like, how to make your content, or how to not sound like Chat GPT. And I was like, wait, so we actually have to learn to sound like human? That says something about marketing. I'm getting on a tangent, but like, it was like sort of a marketing account that was like, how to not sound like a robot. And I was just like, bruh, if you sound like a robot, then you're doing it wrong. Like, yikes.
Yeah, man. Like, there's it's a very interesting time. I think that really astrology is just going to become an excuse to talk to another person. Do you know what I mean? Because like, if I go and see a healer, right? If I go and see a healer or an astrologer or a tarot reader, it's an excuse to spend time around that person, right? Because that person is oracular. Yeah. So if I'm not feeling the best, I'll go and see, I don't know, Zamboni, and Zamboni will look at my chart and go, oh, you got a solar deficiency, mate. You need some dandelion. All of these things that you're synthesizing through your lived experience and professional experience will address the problem. But the thing is that it's an excuse to just basically talk to the person behind the figures and what have you. Because I get it all the time, right? What does moon in the 8th house mean for me? I know it's wonderful that you've said that. It's a lovely little glyph on a circular graph that you've showed me that I've seen maybe 3 times in my life. But tell me what it means to me. And then, the medium becomes the kind of message, not to get all Marshall McLuhan about it, but you become the medium, basically. Like, it's about you as the particular conduit with that particular style and flavor that people are going to be after. Same goes for you too, Mel. Like, I need to kind of get someone who's going to take it at a granular level and really sort of analyze and synthesize and give me something that's pertinent and important and make it make sense. So the astrology is an excuse. I just want Mel to make sense of this for me.
Yeah,
and one thing that you mentioned before is the data analytics component of it, right? And so if we are moving into an era of more information than you know what to do with, then it is helpful to have people who can take the big picture, like I, as someone who has done all of these readings and I typically do them in 10 minutes or less, then it's very important for me to take all of the, like, a chart is going to show you a person's whole goddamn life. That's too much information. And so what I need to do is immediately take pieces. I need to take everything out. and make sure that I only pay attention to what is pertinent to this person in this moment, right? And so there's something that is really important in this moment of like all of the AI text coming at you and all of the AI imagery that's coming at you. And maybe some of it, there's human text and human imagery also coming through. And like, I don't know how to make sense of all of this information. Like having a person who knows how to turn the faucet down and make sure that we only pay attention to the right bits of the information that it's coming in, that is a very strong marketable skill. And I think that it's something that we astrologers cultivate on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, an hour reading with a client for astrology will be, it'll fall into a number of categories. It's either going to be a Saturn conversation, or it's going to be like a very sort of almost a really awesome Jupiter transit conversation. Those are the best, because it's like, oh, gray skies are going to clear up, mate. Like put on a happy face. Or it's going to be a Venus conversation. And so you spend most of your time talking about the transiting position of Saturn, like particularly with someone who pops up, I'm 29, life is hard. Well, I've got news for you, mate. Like it's going to be hard for the next couple of years, and here's why. And then you start sort of embodying what Saturn is. That's something that I don't think that an AI could even learn, even by examining 10,000 chat transcripts, 10 million chat transcripts from apps, like the one you work for or the one that I used to work for. They can learn the behaviors, they can learn the probabilities, but the way in which just observing the chart and having the chart be in itself an oracle, you kind of know ahead of time with this person, with their transits, even by a brief look, that you're going to have to condense not only the entire balance sheet, but right down to even the sentence that you've got an hour to unpack slowly with somebody. Often that's a portal into the bigger sort of picture in terms of how the rest of their chart relates, particularly if that particular planet that's causing an issue is connected by transit or perfection or it's activated. But you can't teach an AI how to do that. You have to kind of be a particularly well-honed conduit, so to speak. But it fucking takes time. It takes so much time. 10,000 hours minimum, right? Like, yeah.
Not maximum at all, right? 10,000 hours is when you begin like actually doing the craft, right?
Yeah.
And, one thing that I think about a lot with when it comes to like competition with other astrologers, not necessarily competition with machines, but competitions with people who practice the craft is, I think one of the things that at least sets me apart and that I sort of like, go toward, that's like my niche or whatever, is that that I try not to get too wild and philosophical with it, and I try not to I don't use a lot of like super fancy techniques like Fredaria or zodiacal releasing or any of this kind of stuff, you know what I mean? Like always coming back to like, okay, what does that mean for me? Right. I've got somebody who's 19 years old sitting in front of me who's going through a breakup or something like this. Like that person is not trying to hear all about stoicism or Aurelius or like any of this sort of shit. Right. What does this mean for me right now? And so being able to tell a story in a way that is relatable on a basic human level, that doesn't necessarily have to spend all this time like getting religious or spiritual or like any of that sort of like fancy stuff that like I really like, you know what I mean? Like I'll sing some Orphic hymns or whatever it is, but like that's not for everyone, and it doesn't need to be for everyone in the way that like everyone deals with partnership issues and stuff like this.
Yeah, 100%, mate. It's interesting. I do a lot of the technique stuff behind the scenes. So I'll look at a couple of different things. Look at transits first of all. I'm like, oh, this person's 29 or 28. So they're doing the Saturn return thing by the looks of things. Let me see if Saturn's prominent in their chart. Oh yeah, look, it's in the 10th house. It's close to their midheaven natally. That's what they're going through. But often it takes a little bit more sort of investigation to really narrow down exactly what could be causing the biggest stresses. And that's not with the intention of appearing like some sort of magic man when they walk into the room and you nail what they're there for. It's more so just to kind of load up some possibilities, do the pre-work so that you can focus on the person in front of you when you're in the session, when you're in the consultation with them. And that's also another thing too that might feed into the sort of cognitive dissonance that the author of the article was talking about, which is that quite often, if you really nail it, you appear like some sort of God figure to clients who come to you. Like, you're not a dentist, you're not magically making the toothache disappear. You're someone who's there to be engaged on issues of great importance to their lives, right? To your clients' lives, like love and loss and death and all of the different things that happen. And if you manage to use the science and the craft and the art right, then they have this impression that you just know everything. And that's, for me personally, it's always been a great temptation, that I've had to kind of avoid, which is stepping into the all-knowing guru kind of archetype. But some people don't. Some people just give into the temptation, and then obviously you get the egotism that the author was talking about as well. I think he used the term magistitis, which is, yeah.
Yeah, so the guru, and so thinking about competition with other astrologers and the guru type thing, and maybe because astrology is having a moment, right? Like, there's so many more astrologers now, and because we're all online, Matt, you're in Australia. I would not have known you 40 years ago, right? Probably, unless you came up to Canada for a conference, right? So it seems like, and this is just a broader thing, everything that's happening anywhere in the world feels like it's happening to you if you're paying attention to it, right? So the astrology community does feel global at this point because we can all hop online and we can hear voices from across the globe, good and bad, right? So in many ways, the competition aspect of astrology, you're now competing with everyone. You're competing with Stephen Forrest and Chris Brennan and Caitlin Kopic and all of the huge names in astrology. Or are you? Because again, you come back to your local sphere, and I'm like, well, okay, sure. There's only going to ever be in any field a couple of the people who are at the very top, right? It doesn't mean that you can't have a fulfilling and wonderful career in doing all of this. And so I think it's a bit of a newbie thing. Like when you get into, I think any field, you especially insecurity, and you feel like jealous or the competition, and you want to make a name for yourself. And social media gives us these great avenues to like fight with people, to like try to prove that you know more than them. And so I think that's a lot of what the person in this article has been observing. But I will say, from just like commentary on my local group. So for me, like my astrology community, if I think about it, there's the band of merry weirdos that I talk to on Discord. I don't really look at the social media stuff. And then there's the local astrologers. So I did join my astrology group, and I'm part of the like executive committee on that. And I have heard all sorts of stories over the 40 some years that it's been running. It's been around since the 70s. It's older than I am. And yeah, it was not great in many ways. Like obviously they're all still around, and the group has stayed together, which is something. But and not to cast aspersions, especially of the dead, but the founder of that group really did use it as sort of a stable for her own students and clients, and she kind of guarded that very tightly. And so, for better and for worse, right? Like I'm sure there was other astrologers, and there has been some that popped up around, a lot of her students, quite frankly. But that was yeah. So that was an aspect of, I think, competition, especially back in the day when there was no internet. So you were really competing against the people in your own hometown. And so if you became a name, then you were really like, some people felt anyway that they had to defend their turf, right? So I think what I'm getting at is that still happens on both a local and a macro level, but it does seem like we're mostly just seeing it on a macro level now, because you do seem like you're competing with like literally everyone on the earth who does astrology at this point in time. And again, going back to the scarcity thing, I do not think that it has to be that way, because there's enough to go around. There's enough curious people, even if they get one reading in their life and that's it. There's enough people who will come your way, and you can make a fulfilling career of it. But again, it depends on your goals, because do you want to be the all-powerful top astrologer in the world. Some people probably do. They're like, I want to be the next Stephen Forrest, or I want to be the next Chris Brennan. And that's going to do things to your mind and the way you interact with people, I think. And that's maybe what's driving some of the worst behaviors that was observed in this article.
Yeah, no, I think you've nailed it, mate. I think there's that the way in which it feels like such a small space. The community does drive those competitive behaviors, and I don't think I'm competing against Chris Brennan. I don't think I'm competing against Caitlin Kopic. I don't have the time or the inclination. But it's so easy to think that you are, because that's all you see. And particularly if they get prompted by the algorithm, they're all the way up the top. They've got excellent social media strategies, excellent publicists, PR people. They've all got a kind of stable of things that your average celebrity would have working for them. And the brand is, the humble bookish astrologer, or, the powerful astromage kind of off in her tower or in his library, kind of just fluffing around with stuffy books and sort of sharing thoughts and insights. It would be easy to kind of think that, oh dear, this person is so much like me, so relatable, so sort of parasocial in terms of the relationship I'm building with them through social media, that I don't stand a chance in hell. Hence, I've got to get really, really nasty in order to stake a claim or carve out a niche. But I really dig that line, though. Are you competing with them? Are you really competing with them? I think that's really cool, man. It's made me change the way I think about it.
I feel like one of the things that we're looking at here, like, I don't think either of those people, Chris Brennan or Caitlin Kopic, even do readings at this point. You know what I mean? Like, Chris Brennan puts people on. And so if you're interested in astrology and can handle a 4-hour lecture about zodiacal releasing or whatever, like, then and then he has you on the show, then those people who are ready to engage in that space, then they might go toward you. But like, those people are not getting a reading from Chris Brennan at this point. Those people are not getting readings from Caitlin Kopic, or I don't even know if Stephen Forrest is doing readings anymore at this point.
Isn't he like 500 years old? He's got to be pretty old.
Yeah, he's got to be in his 80s.
Methuselah over here.
I was on his mailing list for a little while until I unsubbed. But I remember, and it did seem kind of braggy, but I don't think he intended it that way. But he said something, this is maybe in 2021, like he was booked 4 years out. Yep. And he even commented like he might die before. Like he has endless clients until he dies, because he's Stephen Forrest. So, great, good gig if you can get it. I guess if that's what you want. To be honest, tying myself down and doing like, I don't know, 5 readings a day for people. I mean, Zamboni, you're doing way more than that sometimes, but that's not what I want. But some people do, and great. But yeah, so.
Yeah, well, so that's sort of like, so he's off the market. You know what I mean? Like, don't try to get on Stephen Forrest's waiting list. If you actually want to get a reading, like, that's not where you're going to go. Right. Yeah. And so that it really opens up a lot of niches, and as astrology has this moment in popular culture across the Anglosphere, then there's more and more interest in getting a reading. And so as there's more and more interest in getting a reading and people's books fill up and whatnot, then like there's pickings for all of us, like, I don't necessarily know if so social media can very much turn into a winner take all kind of situation, right? So if what you want to do is you want to have an astrology podcast where you like break down how to do astrology, then like you're going to have a tough time competing with Chris Brennan, right? He's got that shit down. But if what you want to do is give readings to people on a one-on-one basis, you want to help them to make meaning in their lives and this kind of thing, then Chris Brennan has left that lane open to you. There's a whole ass lane for you to do your thing, whatever that looks like. And so and as interest is burgeoning and growing further and further, there's more slices for us to take up,
Yeah, I agree. Although I also get a bit nervous thinking about the popularity of it. I kind of like that it's still in the margins. Like as far as like say esoterica, woo, I hate that word, but whatever, it's useful. The woo, the new age type of community goes, astrology is like one of the most, if not the most mainstream things. I would argue anyway. Like everyone knows their sun sign. Thank you to all the sun sign columnists over the years. It's been the paper for decades. But with all that notoriety comes different pressures, and I don't really want some of the things that will come. Like I think so, just to, since we're on this topic, Chris Brennan, I think he really wants to legitimize astrology. I think one of his like deep motives that comes across to me is he wants this to be like a legit profession that you can do and it's respected by like everyone, and that we don't have to defend ourselves from skeptics or even like just have people completely dismiss us because it's a pseudoscience and we figured that out, so what are you talking about? I don't necessarily want that, because I don't know what I want astrology to be necessarily, but I know what I don't want it to be. And I don't want it to become a heavily regulated profession. And I think a lot of the other esoteric professions have gone that way. Like even I've heard in, I think Reiki, but certainly in things like, I'm trying to think of a good example, where as it became more accepted, even like acupuncture and stuff, then it's like, okay, well now you need to have this certification from this place, and you need to have this, and you need to keep it up, and you need to do your continuing education credits every year, and you better check that in, and you create all of these bureaucracy and regulatory oversight. I work in that environment in my day job, heavily bureaucratic, work for a huge organization, and I don't want astrology to be that, because even though I have personally gone and gotten like official certification and stuff, the only reason I did that was because of the way I study and learn things, and I knew that that would work for me. But if you can just listen to like a million hours of the astrology podcast and learn, and then go out, you can do a great job. Like you don't need any letters or after your name or certification. So that's my fear with astrology, was if it gets too popular, it's gonna become subject to those market forces that turn it into any other regulated profession. And I think that would be very sad and limiting.
Yeah, no, I totally
agree completely.
Yeah, I agree completely. I'm not into legitimizing astrology, but if astrology were to become a legitimate quote unquote industry, I'd still keep fucking practicing as an unregistered astrologer. Like,
same. Like I'm not, okay, if I don't have your credentials, okay.
Yeah.
Whatever.
You can't really sort of put too much restriction around how somebody relates to the stars and their place in the entire universe. I mean, I'm sure you could bureaucratize anything, but you can't truthfully do that in a way that's effective. Zed, you're going to say something?
Well, bureaucracy has never been in the service of truth. But if it were to be regulated, then I would think that it will probably be regulated in the way that psychology and psychiatry is regulated. And it would be treated in that kind of way. And so there would be like an ethics set of commandments or whatever you call that, that you would have
It's coming. Like there is that, I don't know if you've heard it, that I can't even remember the name of it, but it's in its infancy, but there is like an ethics code of conduct or something that they're working on. All the big names, there's a big board of people who are on it. I take heart because there's so many people on the board, they're probably not getting anything done. And also I think that the time for that, it was due to some like sexual misconduct stuff, I think. But here's the thing about astrology. Astrology doesn't need a code of ethics to tell you not to rape someone. We have laws for that, like that's we have that already. So anyway, this is getting a little off topic, but yeah, so I should probably stop talking though, because I don't want to piss anyone on that board off. So
no, don't do. I mean, like it's up to you if you want to piss people off or not. Incidentally, Chris Brennan, I'm not trying to piss you off. Caitlin Kopic, definitely not trying.
No, but we talk about them because they're such influence, I think, on all of us. Yeah.
I mean, like the ethics thing, yeah, cool. I dig it. I remember when that became a thing. I think I was in on one of the few initial meetings just to see what it was about. There was like a live stream meeting or something, and that was like 4 years ago. So I don't think a lot's really kind of moved in that space. But I dig what you're saying, right? You don't need an ethics board to tell you not to fucking rape people. That's, one way of definitely looking at it. But the way of...
Well, that's a thing in all of the spaces where there's what you were saying before about like somebody who doesn't necessarily understand what you did to say something resonant, then they start to see you as this like all powerful, all seeing guru type. Yeah. And then whenever that sort of thing happens, then it can turn into a power dynamic. And it can get like, so plant medicine spaces are famous for this. And like any of this kind of thing can get kind of culty and weird. And so that's like, I understand that fear, like they're like, but fuck the police always.
Yeah, always.
Hell yeah. Yeah. Right no, again, being, you tell them being yeah. Well, and this is it. Yeah. Like the guru thing always breeds like there's going to be some gross people who come in and take advantage of that because they're gross people. But that's everywhere, literally everywhere. I think in any sort of little niche community, you're going to have some creep who's going to try to come in and take advantage of vulnerable people. So that's kind of just on all of us across the board and wherever we are in whatever group to be like, fuck that, don't do that. And
yeah, but I think, a school-based approach to astrology has kind of always been part of the mix, so to speak, as well. And schools have teachers and schools have leaders. And again, you would kind of hope, and I don't want to do an appeal to human nature here, but you would hope that additional oversight wouldn't be necessary for people to not act like dicks. But at the same time, right, provided that your experience isn't horrific or too damaging, sometimes you have to encounter charlatans and shysters, at least, at the level, obviously nowhere near abuse or violence. But sometimes you have to encounter people who are false prophets in order to understand and discern who the real sources of truth are. And God knows I've had a ton of shit readings with shit astrologers in my time, right? In my 2 decades doing the job, to kind of understand how to pick and how not to pick. And I think that, the part of the issue with scarcity is that there's so many. The market is so big and the market is so hot right now that there's just so many people who are kind of swanning in who would otherwise not be astrologers. They would be whatever it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. Feng Shui was big back then, Yeah.
Right. And there's also like the whole economy is a gig economy right now.
Yeah.
And so there is, there's like this move away from like doing a 9-to-5 at a big corporation on the understanding that is going to just like, you can just do that for 45 years and then retire and like that model doesn't work. And so, and there's this wide recognition that model doesn't work. And so there is more and more pressure to turn your hobbies into hustles, to turn your interests into money. Right. And so I am, I am sympathetic to that pressure and the feeling of like, oh, I'm kind of nice with astrology. Maybe I should do this professionally, right? And because like every time I hear somebody talking about like online grifting, I'm like, are they talking about me? They might be talking about me. Like, like I'm fucking weird out here. I don't have any credentials I don't got any letters after my name. You know what I mean? Like I took the route of listening to the astrology podcast with Chris Brennan for 1 million hours. And then now I'm like here just kind of winging it a little bit. Right.
Yeah. But I'm saying that's legit. That's totally legit. And I love that that's legit in this space.
Sure.
I mean, there's some people who would say that we're all grifters because astrology's fake and we're just taking advantage of dumb people who think that it's real, right? So there's totally that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but what you've got is integrity, and I think all three of us do. Not to big note myself or anything, but like, I mean, we've got the integrity to know, like, we're not the type of people who would fucking lie to people, right? Like, we wouldn't do that. You wouldn't get someone in front of you, look at the absolute train wreck of a transit list or a chart and go, oh yeah, everything's going to be fine. That's great. Take that holiday, buy that house. You know what I mean? Get a lotto ticket while you're at it. Because it's not necessarily who we are. And the thing about grifters and charlatans and shysters is that they disappear at the drop of a hat, right? Yeah. 5 minutes later they're gone.
It's not sustainable because people see through them pretty quick, right?
Yeah.
Like
yeah. But that's also part of the game as well, right? The industry itself is never going to rid itself of that aspect. And what the only thing you can do is control and exert influence over the one sphere you have control and influence over for the most part, which is your own practice. And, the way in which you relate to a community has to, I think, hopefully what I'd like to see with astrology is the way that the community evolves from something that has to almost by necessity start out in scarcity and start out in competition, and maybe even has to go through a phase where it's heavily regulated, at least comparatively compared to now, and then comes out the other side as something closer to collegiality. Like my big dream of astrology is that we're all just fucking colleagues. I don't do the whole competition thing because I'm interested to hear what people do with the art, right? Like, how does your approach differ from mine? I'm not trying to steal your secrets. I'm more interested in how you deal with a conversation about a heavy Pluto thing. Nice.
Listen, there was never an idea that a good idea is trying to be stolen.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Oh, nice.
A good idea is not faithful to you because you had the idea. A good idea is trying to be out here.
Yeah, it wants to come out. And this happens in writing a lot too, right? Like I'll have great ideas for stories. And if I don't write them, someone else will, because it's trying to get out, right? So you either jump on or you don't. That's
well, what we've got with the Age of Air is we've got community and we've got ideas. And maybe we need to kind of shake off the last vestiges of the Age of Earth and materialism by going through a stage of regulation before we get to something close to collegiality.
Well, real talk, guys. So looking at the astrology and what we see coming, right? Do you think we're going to get that with the Age of Air and all of these upcoming transits? Or the other thing I was wondering about, because this has come up recently, people are talking about potentially another version of like a satanic panic situation. And I think that if we do get that, astrology could be a victim for sure, because it would be it's kind of adjacent to that type of whatever. At least in people who are like hardcore Bible thumpers are going to think that astrology is evil, right? So I was wondering about that. Like, are we going to get the regulation, or like try to self-regulation, which will just kind of tear it down? Or are we going to get external forces where astrology becomes like illegal, and you're getting like arrested or at least charged and like, monetarily penalized so that you can't practice anymore, or at least not openly? I don't know. Like, what do you guys think is the more likely scenario there?
I think everybody's sin is nobody's sin. And astrology is too popular. There are too many people who would be guilty of belief in, engagement with, practice of, for it to be enforceable. What do you reckon, Zamboni?
Yeah, I think that astrology is sort of following behind cannabis. Like cannabis had been like, so it was reefer madness, right? And then now 100 years later, it's like, it's very common to know people who smoke weed, and it is not a thing. Like, I don't give a shit. Right. And so
I live in Edmonton. We have the most cannabis stores in Canada by far. It's insane. Like, you walk down the street and you hit like 5 of them. It's nuts. We're all stoned around.
Exactly. Yeah. So it just like kind of doesn't matter, right? And so I think that astrology is kind of following this model as well, right? Like, so maybe you don't become a cannabis grower or something like that, but if you like sort of dabble a little bit, then that is very normal and very like it's understood to be normal. So if you like know your sun, moon, and rising, and you sometimes read a horoscope or something like that, like, I don't feel like that is enough to conjure the satanic panic, even in people who like really care deeply about Satanism as evil, right? So I also think that in the Age of Air, then I do think that there are likely to be attempts at regulating information, but I don't think that that's how information works. And I think that there's too much information that it will simply overwhelm whatever regulations come into place. And it'll turn around and it'll end up being like laws that are written by robots trying to restrict the robots saying things. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's going to get super convoluted super quickly. And then at the same time, as like global markets are going to be restructured and this kind of thing. Like, I don't feel like it really like has legs to stand on as far as like regulating astrology practices down to the individual, like arresting individuals for practicing astrology. Like, I don't really see that.
Yeah. I mean, the Saturn Neptune that we're coming up to might get a little funky, but no, I don't see that either. If anything, if we were going to get into a hardcore regulation, maybe at the next Saturn Pluto, so in like 20-ish, not quite years or whatever, like maybe under like a really heavy Saturnian cycle, we may get some of that. But I think for the next couple decades, honestly, we're probably good. I have wondered if it's gonna stay this popular. Like, is it really just becoming like another thing that people do? Like, so you can go to a party and it's like totally normal, just be like, oh yeah, I do some astrology, and everyone's like, oh okay. Instead of, I mean, honestly, now if I'm at my day job, I don't talk about it because I'm with a bunch of finance types and they're very normy. There are some, but you got to get them one-on-one. It's not something I would announce at like a group, with some clients and be like, yeah, so I read astrology charts, because most of them are going to be like, all right, weirdo. Like, I just
what's the average age of those people you're describing there?
Anywhere from like, I'm probably still on the young end, so like 40 to 60. So,
right.
Yeah,
sure.
But you'd be surprised though, Mel. Like, I don't know about you, Zamboni, but I get my fair share of finance types, lawyers, doctors, surgeons coming through.
Oh, I've done readings for coworkers for sure, one-on-one, but it's just in that professional, I'm just saying, like at a meeting, with clients, that I am a normal, boring finance day job person, and we don't go there unless if the conversation shifted, I'm going to jump in. But so far it hasn't yet. I'm waiting for it though.
That's fair. Look,
I think.
Go ahead. Sorry, mate.
Well, I think that in the age group of like from 19 to 39 or something like that, I think that this is very common. It's the cannabis thing. You know what I mean? Like if you're somebody who's 19 years old, you probably have known people who have not thrown their whole lives away because they smoke some weed sometimes. Like you probably have known a couple of people who were really into like wanted to talk about Taurus means whatever, right? And like and it's just this part of the landscape. We live here now. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
no, that's true. And I'm sure
it's appropriate cocktail party conversation.
Oh yeah.
You're right that like, yeah, I can definitely see the generational divide thing. And it just, the way it works, the clients and people I'm meeting are still usually older than me. If not, they're starting, because I'm getting older, they're starting to be sort of peers with me. But yeah, I think maybe in another 10 years when things are shifted again, that might be different. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, don't worry. The clients just keep getting younger, unfortunately, Mel. I can tell you now.
Funny how that works.
I saw Lisa Scheim did a tweet years ago that always stuck with me, which was, I'm getting so old now that I can remember the transits from when my clients were born. And I had a chuckle at that. But then recently I'm like, fuck, I remember 2003. I remember how shit that was astrologically. Like, now you're sitting in front of me with your fucking Saturn and Taurus, mate. There's that. I got a final question just to kind of bring things to a close. And I think, the answer may be self-evident. But given everything we've discussed today, given the state of where astrology is, will you guys be doing this in 10 years' time? Mel, will you be doing this in 10 years' time, mate?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
It's not a job. It's not like a profession. Well, it is, but it isn't, right? It is a calling. Yeah. And I always feel like it's a little douchey to be like, this is my calling, but it is, like, it truly is. And I did have an astrologer tell me right at the outset, when I was asking her some questions about, getting into it. And she said, like, the planets choose you. So, they either do or they don't. Right. Like.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. What about you, Zamboni?
Yeah, well, that was one of the things that really attracted me to this craft is it's not like gymnastics or something like that where you hit a certain age and then you got to find something else to do with your life. If I just continue studying astrology at the rate that I'm studying astrology now, then I will be super badass in 10 years and I will be super extra badass in 10 years down the line from that. And by the time I get to like Demetra George's age or something like that, like I'm going to be the baddest motherfucker around. And I love that idea. I just love that idea so much. So, so yeah, you're not going to stop me.
5-year waiting list and $300 for a half-hour reading, eh? Pretty good.
Yeah.
Nice work if you can get it, mate.
Well, I don't know if the price is going to change, like, we'll see.
True. Yeah. Some central bank digital currency social credit unit.
There you go.
Something like that.
Yeah. How many Pelosi bucks is it worth?
Pelosi bucks. Yeah, that's the word. Damn Mercury station. All right, cool. So to wrap it up, I need to share where people can find you guys, because this has been a pretty awesome conversation, right? And the people that are listening are going to want to book in. So we'll start with yourself, Zamboni. Where can people find you, mate?
Sure. So you can find me zambonifunk.com. You can go to Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. It's all as Zamboni Funk. You can also go to Spotify, Tidal, Pandora, Apple Music, wherever you like to get your music at. I do a bunch of music. Some music just dropped today that I'm super excited about. It is funky as hell. The P is strong. So yeah, you can find me in all. Zamboni Funk it's all one word. It's all in all of the places. So you can find me there.
Perfect, mate. Mel Priestley, where can people find you?
melpriestley.ca or .com. Either one will take you to me, and that's my blog. Sign up to my newsletter. I should send one of those out one of these days too. You'll see what I've been up to writing, if I'm going to be speaking anywhere. Yeah, so that's where you'll find me. You'll find me on some social media too, but honestly, I probably won't look at it for a while. So come to my website if you want to see me. Send me an email. Honestly, I'm a little old school that way, but if you want to talk to me, just email me. I'll get back to you.
Nice one, guys. All right. So we're going to link everything up in the show notes. We'll link the article. We'll link everybody's where to find everyone. So thank you so much for joining us, man. This has been a really cool discussion. I really liked chewing over the stuff with you guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was great.
All right, legends. We'll see you on the flip side. Take it easy, okay?
Later.
Yeah.